Good evening. It's really nice to see all of you here. This is an adjustment for me in that the lights are quite bright, so if you see me kind of moving my head around, that's what it is. My name is Marge Leeson, and I have the privilege of being the president of the Seniors University Group. And I've been looking forward to this evening as we welcome to the Distinguished Canadian Award Lecture to honor Dr. Shahab and his team. This event is taking place in the Dark Hall at the University of Regina campus. I remember this Dark Hall when I was much, much younger, and seeing the renovation is just amazing. How many of you are in here to see it for the first time after the renovation? I think if I move this way. Right on, right on. It's absolutely beautiful, isn't it? So, as I said, this event is taking place in Dark Hall at the University of Regina College Avenue campus, which is situated on Treaty Fort lands, which are the traditional territories of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis. The University of Regina also has a presence in the Treaty 6 territory. Right now, I would like to ask Matriarch Brenda Dubois to come to the podium to offer a blessing for us this evening.
Thank you very much again for the opportunity just to be a part of the space and share some air with you this evening. If you don't mind, that they say I'm being requested to offer a blessing, but it's a blessing that I'm actually going to ask you to honor yourself with, not a blessing of me to you. So if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you to take your first breath, cleansing breath. And at this moment, I'd like you to think about something that happened over this past while that made you happy. Made you happy. Fluttered, wanted to dance, raised your hands up. Yeah, think about that. And then in that same breath, I want you to think about something that touched your heart and water came out of your eyes. You'd say that's love, but also water comes out of our eyes for other reasons, besides the loss of a human or someone we love. And so, to help us to be able to see better, to be able to feel better, to carry our passage better. I'd like you now, you can take your second breath. And in taking the second breath, if you have something in your life that you're worried about, please say a prayer in your own way. But if you have the ability to affect change from whatever it is you're worried about, do what your human needs to do today to affect that change. If you have challenges in your life, give blessings. Give blessings. Helps with our transformation. Helps us be better humans. Taking the third breath, if you don't mind, I'm praying you had something good to eat today. I always say, try to stretch it out. You don't have to have 3 big meals. You can have 5. Make it a little longer, make it healthier. I pray you used your body today and got some exercise. Whatever your abilities may be. And I pray that you get the blessings of good sleep tonight. And go home. In taking your fourth breath, I'd like you in your mind's eye. Think of 4 things you have gratitude for. And today we had a conversation about Thanksgiving. about giving thanks. Of all things we started with Mother Earth first. And then we gave thanks for the human gift, the human shell we have, right from our feet, right to the top of our head. And that was Thanksgiving today. And giving thanks. But you, please, give yourself a blessing of gratitude. 4 things. And then the 5th breath, if you don't mind, is something you don't answer right now. It's something you take when you leave this room and you go to bed tonight. And if you're granted that 5th breath tomorrow, please ask yourself, what is one thing you can do different because of something you went through or learned today? Please help with your transformation as a human. We're all here, presumably to get better. And I wish you great blessings for yourself this evening. Thank you. I to talk.
Well, I would just like to give you just a little background on and an introduction to the Distinguished Canadian Award. The Distinguished Canadian Award is presented by the Seniors University Group in partnership with the Lifelong Learning Centre. The award was established in 1985 to recognize and celebrate the accomplishments of older adults who continue to make valuable contributions in a wide range of endeavors. Some of you may remember that Tommy Douglas, former Premier of Saskatchewan, was the first recipient of the Distinguished Canadian Award. Since then, the award has been presented to outstanding journalists, authors, lawyers, and more. Other DCA recipients have included Flora MacDonald, Sylvia Fedoric, Dr. Alan Rajput, and Shirley Douglas, who received the award 20 years after the first award was presented to her father. More recent recipients have included Maria Campbell, David Suzuki, George Reed, Tom Jackson, and Gail Bowen, to name a few. And to let you know that the Seniors University Group and the Lifelong Learning Centre have recognized many outstanding Canadians by presenting them with the Distinguished Canadian Award. We are pleased to be here to honor Dr. Shahab and his team this evening. Right now, I would like to ask Dr. Christy Schultz, Dean of Continuing Education at the University of Regina, to bring greetings on behalf of Dr. Jeff Keshen, University of Regina President and Vice Chancellor, who is unable to be with us tonight.
Thank you, Marge, and thank you for the opportunity to say a few words, both on my own behalf and on behalf of President Keshen, who does send his regrets that he could not be here this evening. I promise you, though, that although I'm speaking for 2, I'll keep my remarks brief. Our distinguished Canadian award recipient, Dr. Shahab, is truly the main attraction tonight. I want to begin by thanking Matriarch Brenda for her words, and by acknowledging that the University of Regina, with its 3 federated colleges, First Nations University of Canada, Luther College, and Campion College, are situated on Treaty 4 lands with a presence in Treaty 6. Many of you, and I've seen some of you in person tonight already, were present in June at the 45th anniversary celebration of the Seniors University Group. You may recall at that event, in speaking with you, President Keshen said, "Members of the Seniors University Group and the Lifelong Learning Centre contribute in countless ways to the university and have done so for the past 45 years. Your contributions add value to the University of Regina, and I hope that the relationship is mutually beneficial, one that adds value, meaning, purpose, and vibrancy to your own lives. Those words are fitting in the context of why we are gathered here together this evening. As an historian, President Keshen has personally expressed to me an interest in these distinguished Canadian awards, awards that themselves celebrate the value, meaning, purpose, and vibrancy of Canadian citizens who make a positive difference in the life of our province and our country. Many of you know that the photographs of past DCA recipients are in a display case outside the Archer Library on the main campus of the University of Regina. On looking at that display recently, President Keshen remarked that the recipients since the awards were started in 1985 have been a veritable who's who of recent Saskatchewan and Canadian history. They are the people who have helped build and make better the world in which we live. As you've already heard, but here are a few examples that really stood out for President Keshen. These recipients include Tommy Douglas, a former Premier of Saskatchewan and founder of Medicare; Stephen Lewis, politician, diplomat, and humanitarian; Dr. Sylvia Federick, scientist and former Lieutenant Governor of Saskatchewan; and David Suzuki, broadcaster and environmental advocate. Honoring these and many other distinguished Canadians and adding a notable recipient to the roster this evening is a noble thing to do. On behalf of the university and the wider community we serve, I want to thank Marge Thiessen, the Senior Universities Group, and the Lifelong Learning Centre for honoring those who embody our university's motto, as one who serves. It is wonderful to be together with all of you to celebrate the Distinguished Canadian Award for the first time in a few years, here in person at Dark Hall. And I want to express my appreciation to everyone who is in attendance this evening and everyone who made this event possible. Thank you for supporting the Centre for Continuing Education, the University of Regina, and of course, our wonderful award recipient, Dr. Shahab. Enjoy the rest of the evening.
Like the runway. Bear with me. Thank you very much, Dr. Schultz, for sharing with us. We'd just like to give you a little introduction of Dr. Shahab. During the worst days and months of the COVID-19 pandemic, the calm and compassionate face and the reassuring voice of Dr. Shahab became familiar to everyone in Saskatchewan. As the province's chief medical officer, Dr. Shahab has been on the front line in explaining the public health response to the pandemic in both scientific and human terms. Dr. Shahab received his primary medical degree from Rawalpindi Medical College at the University of Punjab in 1986, graduating at the top of his class. He initially trained in internal medicine and became a member of the Royal College of Physicians in the UK. While practicing as an internist, he realized the value of public health in preventing both communicable and non-communicable diseases and attained a master's degree of public health from Johns Hopkins University. And after completing his training at the University of Alberta, he was named a Fellow in Public Health and Preventive Medicine of the Royal College of Physicians of Canada. He is a past chair of the Medical Health Officers Council of Saskatchewan and past president of the Saskatchewan Public Health Association. During his career, Dr. Shahab has worked internationally as an internist and a public health specialist. He has written and presented widely on a diverse range of issues, including emergency issues such as West Nile virus, climate change, and public health, using software to facilitate collaboration among healthcare professionals, drinking water quality, the social conditions and nutritional status of street children, and the characteristics of road traffic injuries seen in emergency rooms. Drawing on his experience during the pandemic, he was the keynote presenter at the Saskatchewan Health Research Showcase in November of 2020 and presented the Louis and Ellie Christ Lecture in September 2021 at the Family Medicine Conference in Saskatchewan. His areas of special interest: vaccination programs, communicable disease control, environmental health, chronic disease prevention, and pandemic planning have prepared him well for the very public role that he was thrust into in March of 2020. He was appointed Chief Medical Health Officer in 2012, having served in the deputy role for 3 years before that. Prior to that, he was the Medical Health Officer for the Sunrise Health Region in Southeast Saskatchewan from 2001 to 2006. Asked what kept him going through the pandemic, which its anguished stories and the continual updates about the toll COVID-19 was taking, Dr. Shahab said it was recognizing that we were all in this together, and that behind every story of loss and hardship were tales of courage and community spirit that really embody the Saskatchewan way. That is what put wind in my sails each and every day, he said. Earlier this year, Dr. Shahab received an honorary degree from the University of Regina. At that time, he said to the university, "Through the many public events and lectures that it holds, embodies the role that centers of learning play in contributing to the communities they serve. It is a unique honor, and especially for persons who have come from away. It embodies what it means to be Canadian, to be accepted and recognized in this fashion." At this time, I would just like to we are presenting not there just yet. We are presenting the 2022 Distinguished Canadian Award to Dr. Shahab and his team in recognition of outstanding contributions to promote the health, safety, and well-being of Saskatchewan residents during the COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Shahab. Great pleasure to present this to you on behalf of the Senior University Group and the Lifelong Learning Center. We'll show it up and then I'll take it with me.
Wow, it's such an honor and privilege to be here. When we were discussing this a few months ago, I thought it would be a classroom over lunch with coffee and muffins, but in this August space. It's quite the honor. And thank you very much for taking time out from your busy evenings. And thank you to my team as well, sitting and coming in, and my wife as well, for joining me in this remarkable honor. I just want to, obviously start first of all by acknowledging that we are gathered on 54th and in the homeland of the Métis, and have come here from near and far. As was mentioned, we came to Canada about 20 years ago. And also pause to reflect that just last week we celebrated September 20th. We recognized and honored the Truth and Reconciliation findings, and pause to reflect on what has passed. And so, encouraging us to continue doing what we're doing to honor and recognize the history of this land and this people, and recognize that we are all ultimately creative people and respect the tradition and honors and culture. And again, while this award named me and my team, this was something that was done by countless dedicated colleagues in government as well as in the health system. Some who have joined me today, and some who are busy working in hospitals, again, as we see an increase in the fall in COVID cases. So, I want to recognize everyone who has worked so hard for the last 2.5 years with dedication and support. And of course, a partnership with our First Nation Indigenous colleagues throughout Saskatchewan that has made our pandemic response a success. And of course, the cooperation of all of you as you spent the last 2.5 years, recognizing the limitations that we all had to observe, and making sure that we kept our health system intact for those who needed it most. The world is no stranger to pandemics. We have faced plague and pestilence for millennia. Plague in the Middle Ages, took the lives of an estimated 75 to 200 million people, maybe a third of the population at that time. And certainly we will see global pandemics in the future. And as I was coming up, I saw the plague in this magnificent hall, recognizing the Fooms who had donated to build this hall in the memory of the son who passed away in 1918. And this hall itself was built in 1928. And that reminds me of the last major pandemic in recent memory, the influenza pandemic of 2018. At that time, about 500 million people, or 1/3 of the world's population, which was about 1.5 billion at that time, became infected with the virus, and the number of deaths was estimated to be at least 50 million. And that high mortality at that time was mostly in young adults. Since that time, there's been 4 more influenza pandemics, but none as significant as the 1918 one. And then, of course, COVID-19, which was quite significant, and I'll get into that in a bit. And we have to remember that a lot of the pandemic strains that came before the influenza strains became, circulating respiratory viruses over the years that followed. So now that we come to 2019, what has changed? Well, the current COVID-19 pandemic is not due to the influenza strain. It was due to what's known as coronavirus SARS-CoV-2. And why it's called coronavirus SARS-CoV-2 is that we had a similar issue in 2003 due to what was known at that time SARS coronavirus CoV-1. But that is different because that virus was, although very severe, it had a 30% mortality, but it was also more transmissible later during illness. And while it impacted many countries, including Canada, through collective measures such as infection control and healthcare facilities, it was stamped out within a few months. About 8,000 people got impacted, there were about 800 deaths. And then when we come to 2019, the end of 2019, we started seeing SARS-CoV-2, or the COVID-19 pandemic. So I just want to do a bit of a recap on how the last 2 and 3/4 years have passed. I certainly recall this journey vividly. Started from the initial reports in late December 2019. The actions in Saskatchewan took to manage the pandemic through 2020. A time when we have to remember there were no vaccines or specific treatments. and it was critical to keep overall case numbers low. We learned by March 2020 that it was more transmissible than SARS-CoV-1, including an asymptomatic transmissible phase, due to its broad public health measures and case contact tracing and isolation and quarantine to contain spread became essential. Remember how we went into lockdown in March 2020, and only cautiously, once we had learned how public health measures could control the transmission, we were able to gradually relax some, if not all, measures over the summer of 2020. And these tools, these public health measures, while hard on all of us, did manage to control transmission even in the absence of vaccines and treatments. There was no guarantee that we would have vaccines, but to all of our surprise and good fortune, vaccines did become available within a year by December 2020. And while they were initially available in small quantities, their effectiveness in protecting the most vulnerable became quickly relevant. The vaccine program started initially to protect long-term care residents and staff, and healthcare workers working on the front lines. So, we all remember the tears of relief and joy as we saw long-term care residents getting vaccinated, and by that time we had started seeing quite significant outbreaks in long-term care, not just elsewhere in Canada, but also in Saskatchewan. And the vaccines could not have come, at a better time to protect our most vulnerable seniors and elders in long-term care, personal care homes. And then very quickly, as the vaccine program started, first with people 70 and older in the community, we had another surprise that the pandemic threw at us, the Alpha variant, which the third wave started in Regina just as we were coming out of our winter wave in spring 2021, necessitating further public health measures within Regina, not required within the rest of Saskatchewan beyond the basic public health measures that were in place. Still, the vaccine program really caught up, and we were able to offer vaccines to everyone in Saskatchewan 12 and older by June of 2021. So again, that was the second phase, a quick supply of vaccines, initially slow, but picking up speed over March and April, May. I remember in a drive-through on a Saturday when I became eligible, going right away, and I'm sure many of you did as well. And throughout the multiple waves of the pandemic, the communities continued to play a key role, supporting persons in isolation because of illness or exposure or post-travel. Neighbor helping neighbor, the Saskatchewan way. A very pragmatic approach that will see us through this pandemic as well as the many challenges that have come and may come our way. And then, the second phase, the vaccine uptake, we started very quickly. Our uptake went up as vaccine supplies improved, and then we plateaued over the summer of 2021. And again, things started relaxing, public health measures started relaxing as we entered the summer of 2021. And then another surprise, the Delta variant in the fall of 2021. Now, that was in many ways the most challenging of all, because on the one hand, all of us who were vaccinated were doing quite well. At that phase, the vaccines were so effective that we were not seeing hospitalizations, even in those who were at high risk, if they were fully vaccinated at that time, 2 recommended doses. But the Delta wave did impact those who were unvaccinated, and again we saw tremendous pressures on ICU, hospitalizations, tragic deaths, primarily in people who were unvaccinated, and that was extremely challenging. At that time, we also recognized that even though our elders or seniors had been vaccinated over the winter of 2020 and spring of 2021, immunity does wane, as it does for the flu vaccine. And we started with a booster program, one of the first in Canada to offer booster doses, the first booster dose to initially long-term care in September, and then to persons 70 and older, and then 60 and older later in the year. And those booster doses, the first booster doses, continued over late 2021 and early 2022. So we thought the Delta wave, it had its impact, and now it's over. And then another surprise, the Omicron variant, which took the world by storm. Again, it was very different from the previous variants. It was much more transmissible. But thankfully, even especially in those who were fully vaccinated, it was less severe. So more transmissible on the one hand, but less severe on the other hand. And many of us were exposed to Omicron either in early 2022 or in spring of 2022, and those were our fifth and sixth waves. Again, very challenging. We had large number of absenteeism in healthcare, in schools, but thankfully our hospitalizations and ICU admissions did not go as high as they did in the Delta wave. So where are we now? Well, at the moment, as predicted, we are seeing seventh wave, and transmission is increasing throughout Saskatchewan. We publish our weekly EPI reports. The next will come up next week. That's showing an upward transmission rate of Omicron, and now it's in spring it was BA1, and now it's BA5. So that's something that we are very aware of. And it's something that we need to respond to in terms of where we are now. Obviously, the pandemic has had a significant toll so far, about 6.5 million lives lost globally. But at this point, we are in a different place. We have a bivalent vaccine that's now available, and again, I would encourage everyone to consider getting a bivalent vaccine. I got mine last Thursday as soon as I became eligible. But we know that as we're not observing all the public health measures we observed for the first 2 years, we will see more respiratory illnesses also come up. In Australia, who had their summer a few months ago, and who had their winter a few months ago, and what was our summer, they did see an early and severe influenza season, as well as an increase in COVID transmission. So again, it's important to get vaccinated, to get the bivalent booster, as well as the flu shot. And if you've recently had Omicron, to wait 3 months before getting boosted. The other thing is that we also need to do everything we can in our personal toolkit. Many of us are wearing masks based on our own risk assessment to protect others who are at higher risk. Those of us who are older, who have underlying risk factors, and we're not fully vaccinated, need to be aware of our treatment options. We can choose to decide which gatherings we are comfortable attending, maintain good ventilation indoors. Big spaces like this certainly are safer than tight, crowded gatherings, and outdoors is always better than indoors. Obviously, wash hands, clean surfaces, and stay home if you're ill, and using at-home tests when appropriate. Now, with this, what can we expect over the short term? Well, if you look at how much we've achieved, a vaccine, and that is made available, now bivalent doses becoming available, there's so much to celebrate, but there's still some cautions that we have to observe. In terms of the medium term, it's really hard to make predictions, but a couple of publications over the last couple of weeks have shown that we do have high levels of immunity, not just through vaccination, but through exposure to primarily Omicron over the last year. Prior to Omicron, till December of this year, anywhere from 5 to 10% of the population in Canada had been exposed to COVID, and we all knew people who had earlier strains. Many of them were working in frontline jobs, and if they got exposed after vaccination, they had a milder illness. But after that, in this year, the estimates by the Canadian Immunity Task Force suggest that more than 60% of Canadians have been exposed to Omicron. Young people have been exposed to a higher degree, about 80%. People 16 and older have been exposed to a lower degree, about 40%. Hence, those of us who are older need to continue to take precautions, wear our best mask, make sure we are up to date with our COVID and influenza vaccines. But we are in a different space. We have high levels of hybrid immunity through both vaccination and infection. And that's where, over the medium term, over the next 6 months to a year, we hope that while we will see repeated waves of COVID, hopefully our hospitalization rates will remain low. But we will have to keep adjusting. As winter comes, I think more of us will be wearing masks. More of us will be thinking twice whether we want to attend large gatherings. And of course, we'll have to watch very carefully if we see a variant which is more severe and has characteristics of escape to current vaccines and current immunity due to prior infection. Of course, that would mean that we would have to again look at more broader public health measures. It's unknown whether that can or would happen, but it's certainly something that we need to watch out for. And then there's a global mechanism to monitor variants throughout the world, and there's a lot of global cooperation that's required to support that. And then when we look at the longer term, outside of a year, for the next few years or decades, obviously, I think all of us know that it's really hard to predict the future, even for COVID, let alone other pandemics. But it is notable that we had 4 major influenza pandemics in the past century. The most significant one was in 1918, and then 3 further pandemics up to the H1N1 pandemic. They were less severe. We all had respiratory illnesses due to coughs and colds, many of which are coronaviruses. But we've had 3 significant coronavirus infections over the last 20 years, starting with SARS in 2003, which had a higher mortality rate of 10%. MERS-CoV, which started about 10 years ago, it has a much higher mortality rate of 30%, but hasn't taken off because it's not highly transmissible between people. It transmits mostly from animal reservoirs to human reservoirs. And then SARS-CoV-2, the pandemic we're currently in, which is highly transmissible, less severe than SARS-CoV-1 and MERS, but certainly, it was severe enough to require significant measures to keep our health system intact for urgent care for COVID and other illnesses, and to prevent high rates of illness and mortality. So we're coming out of that right now, and but where will we be a year from now? I think it's hard to predict. I think the hope is that we will continue to see variants of COVID that may be more transmissible but less severe, and our ongoing boosters for COVID and other measures will continue to keep it at an acceptable level in terms of its transmission. But will it become like influenza, transmitting every year in the winter? It's hard to make those predictions right now. And of course, we cannot predict when the next big pandemic due to another infectious agent will be. And of course, we have to be ready for that. And we have to ensure that we have continued to observe global cooperation and solidarity. Vaccine inequity was very challenging. That those of us who live in nations that are richer, we got vaccines early for the most vulnerable, and then for everyone. And many parts of the world did not even have access to vaccines, even for the most vulnerable. And then that started to take off a few months later. So there's a higher toll in many countries due to infection before vaccines could be made available. And then one thing I just wanted to recognize, and of course I was listening to the announcement about the award, and really, I think this award has been given to people who were giants in their fields, and I certainly don't consider myself near them. But I think what we have to recognize is what we saw in each other during the last 2.5 years. When we didn't know what COVID was all about in March 2020, many people were asked to stay home and were able to stay home based on their jobs. But many had to continue on the front lines: physicians, nurses, respiratory therapists in the health system, other healthcare staff, but also teachers and school and university staff, where labs had to run. While classes moved online very quickly, we knew the value of in-person learning for school children, and so classes moved back to in-person learning in September 2020 with layers of protection. And then police, fire, always on the job, emergency responders, public safety officials. persons who work public-facing jobs in retail and restaurants. There were strict guidelines around reducing transmission, physical distancing, and so forth. But restaurants remained open, grocery stores, other retail environments for the most part remained open because those were essential services. Our truck drivers who delivered all the essentials to Saskatchewan, cab drivers, farmers, natural resource workers, persons ensuring that the water, the lights, and the heat stayed on. While many stepped back and were able to do so, all these people and many more stepped forward. And never did I see, in the face of significant risk, anyone hesitate to step forward to do the job that was essential and had to be done. These were the real heroes, and this kept the economy going, this kept society going. And that is important as well. We saw that in many parts of the world there were supply chain shortages, food shortages, and we thankfully did not see that. So when we talk about pandemic planning, it is not just about healthcare, it's about the whole society functioning in a cohesive way that protects the most vulnerable, and that the most vulnerable may be different based on a particular pandemic. In this case, it was the elderly, but that also keeps important parts of society functioning, and when possible, allows children to go back to school and other things that are so important for the development of our children and youth. And the other thing that I just want to reflect on was that, we, like I described, we can't be certain about what the future brings, but we do need to face this with humility, to act transparently with the knowledge we have, and acknowledge adapting as the science evolves and the circumstances change. And one thing that I just wanted to speak to here was that, one thing that really, I think, caught all of us by surprise was that, while we had lots of science, a vaccine, the viral genome was sequenced within weeks in 2020, January, February. Vaccine trials that started in the summer. There's a vaccine available in 12 months. To date, there's about 370 publications that have been published on COVID, so astounding science. But at the same time, amazing levels of misinformation. And we do have to recognize that, the impact of misinformation. Now, misinformation has been around since antiquity, where it filled the vacuum where there was absence of knowledge or served other purposes. But the speed with which it now spreads globally, whether it's COVID or other issues, and the way it can influence actions in the face of evidence to the contrary, is certainly something that is unique to a pandemic in the digital age. Misinformation is very different from using evidence that we have to inform policy options and to have a dialogue on pros and cons of various policy options. So certainly that is something that I think has been, certainly for me, a really important lesson. And as we go forward to face uncertainty, I think we also need to rely on the science and to make hard policy choices to balance protecting ourselves, protecting the health system, but also allowing us to lead our lives in a safe manner. And to act transparently with the knowledge we have, and to acknowledge that we need to change based on evolving knowledge and evolving circumstances. And the other thing I just want to say in closing was that, and we talk about this often with my family, with people I know throughout the world, that we need to acknowledge, at least that's what I feel, our privileges and blessings here in Saskatchewan and in Canada. And yes, we need to also acknowledge the inequities that exist in Saskatchewan and Canada and keep addressing them. But we need to acknowledge that we do have many privileges that many in the world do not. And be ready to support others in the world, whether it's emerging infectious diseases, the current or next pandemic, challenges to food security that we are seeing due to conflict or a changing climate, floods that we are seeing in many parts of the world, including where many of my friends and family live, partly due to climate change. Other challenges like biodiversity loss, pressures on water resources. Now, all these things, pandemics and all the other global events, remind us that we live on one planet. And a One Health approach that understands our local as well as global interdependencies is more critical now than it has ever been. An approach that promotes equitable access to the essentials, food, safe water, clean air, things we have in abundance here, shelter, and there's lots of initiatives to address homelessness in Canada and Saskatchewan, but globally, there's a priority security. Who would have believed that conflict would break out in Europe? Health, the right to health, the right to education, the right to employment, the right to leisure and to be who we want to be. And we have to do all this while conserving our beautiful, resilient, yet fragile earth for future generations. So I think I just want to close with these messages. And again, I'm truly honored and humbled by this award. I do not believe I deserve this. I accept this on behalf of all of us who worked so hard. And I just want to thank you for being here this evening and to the university for recognizing the work we all did in this way. Thank you.
I would like to call on Tamara Tucker, who is our program coordinator at the Lifelong Learning Center, to thank Dr. Shahab and his team for their outstanding contributions to the health, safety, and well-being of Saskatchewan residents during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you, Dr. Shahab. We appreciate the time that you've given us this evening in presenting. And of course, we appreciate the efforts and contributions of you and your team throughout the pandemic. It was really interesting to look back over the last 2 years, that timeline that you drew out for us tonight. And I know that timeline is significant for all of us. It holds a lot of emotion, and your leadership throughout that time is appreciated. It was a constant throughout that, so we thank you for that very much. We wish you and your team all the very best in the future and throughout the rest of the pandemic as we move forward. At the Lifelong Learning Center, we offer non-credit courses and presentations on a wide variety of topics, including a monthly series called Wellness Wednesdays. This is offered in partnership with the Saskatchewan Health Authority, and we look forward to working with the team at Population Health to offer future presentations about important topics affecting health and well-being of Saskatchewan residents. Most fall courses have already begun, but we do have some later starting courses and presentations that may be of interest to some here this evening. You might like to check out the upcoming art appreciation, astronomy, gardening, investing, or perhaps a monthly presentation on Regina's historic architecture, as well as the upcoming Wellness Wednesday presentations. The next one will be on home supports, make it possible to age in place. And then the November one will be on adding more plant-based food to your diet. And then there's more details on that on the website. So please visit that for more information. I'll now turn things over to Carrie Strathy for closing remarks.
I see what March means about bright lights here. I am Carrie Strathy, the manager of the University of Regina Community Programs Unit at the Centre for Continuing Education. It gives me great pleasure to thank everyone who was involved in making this evening possible. Thank you to Brenda Dubois, our matriarch, who was here to lead us through some guided exercises that will hopefully help us all make us feel better in future. Thank you to Dr. Christy Schultz, the Dean of Continuing Education, who brought greetings both on behalf of herself and also Dr. Keshen. Merit, thank you for being the program coordinator and thanking Dr. Shahab. Marge, thank you for being the MC for this evening and helping us all stick to our timelines and keep going as we should. Thank you also to the Dark Hall staff, to Dawn Bergstrom and Jamie James and the others who are here this evening. And last but not least, I would like to thank Dr. Shahab and his team. It was really thanks to all of the things that you helped us to understand during the pandemic that we were able to make some decisions that help us, to help our families, and to help others in our community remain safe. And we look forward to your guidance in future as we continue to struggle through what we hope is going to be the tail end of the pandemic. But like you said, no one knows for sure what's going to happen. And the evening would not be complete without thanking all of you for joining us to honor Dr. Shahab and his team. You're now welcome to join us in the lobby to congratulate Dr. Shahab and visit with others who might have come out tonight to celebrate his outstanding accomplishments. And I know there were a couple of people who were interested in taking photographs and kind of thought the lighting here was not the best. So maybe down in the lobby would be a good place to do that. So we'll see you all down there in a couple of minutes. Thank you.